about Imperial Japan. And in this episode, we are gonna talk about the beginnings of modern China. Oh, and if you're thinking this is chocolate, you're mistaken. This is a drug. Okay, let's find out about it in the video. Why don't we start by looking at some notes. My name is Shan, and let's get started. Alright, now that you saw my note, let's get started on our modernization. And if you're still thinking this is chocolate, as I said earlier, it's a drug. We'll learn more about it later in this video. Well, let's get started. If you remember from our Eastern episode, the aftermath after the war with the Eastern against the Japanese, because the Japanese was a very ton of them, a ton. And so the Manchus, which are some of the common invaders of Korea, invaded China instead, and they overthrew the Ming Dynasty. They overthrew the Ming Dynasty, and then they changed it to the Qing Dynasty. If you can remember from that episode, if you can remember from that episode, you might know that this will become the last dynasty of China. All right. As I said in this demonstration, the Qing Dynasty was the last dynasty of China, and just to say, the Manchus were very unpopular. Well, it's because the Chinese greatly resisted the Manchus, because the Manchus were not Han Chinese. Han Chinese. This was, I'm not surprised, because the Manchus were one of the enemies of Korea, which were allies of the Chinese. Man, this is reflection. Alright. Like, this was when the Qing Dynasty happened. A lot of the Manchu government wanted control of all of China. So to keep their control, they occupied important government roles of China. But they still needed some Chinese people, such as the Chinese administrators, to rule China, the whole empire. First think of China without the Mongolia title and the Tibet title land. And then later, after the Qing Dynasty got its reign for a few years, the Manchus eventually conquered Mongolia and Tibet. Also, the Chinese people the Manchus were still unpopular to the Chinese people because they forced the Chinese to wear braids, so that is a symbol of loyalty to the Manchu government, but that's for another story. Alright, so now China looked like this, like modern day China with the turkey shape. Yes, with the turkey shape. And, well, the Manchus wanted to conquer more land, and then, well, there are a lot of invasions. So these arrows are the invasions for China, but we're going to talk about in the later video. Then later in 1800, the Chinese population grew, and it became the largest populated country in the world. I'm not even kidding. Yeah, and this was very attractive. No, not that attractive. Attractive to a lot of British marketeers who wanted to make markets in East Asia, which includes China. However, the Chinese were not interested in British goods, so the British gradually started selling a drug called opium, and this is opium, not chocolate. Don't eat it. This is a crayon illustration. Don't eat it. Well, and this opium, a drug, was very addictive. So every Chinese person who bought opium wanted to buy more of it. It was very addictive. Don't smoke. It's also very addictive. And also don't eat opium. I've never seen opium until now, though. But still, moving on. The opium. Then this later led to the Opium War. Because, well, after the opium was first introduced and it got a lot of addictive stuff, the Chinese government banned opium. But the British wanted to sell more opium here, so they started the Opium Wars. I'll make another video for that in a separate video, but still. So there were two Opium Wars. The first Opium War was a war that was won by the British. Then, right then, they took Hong Kong, and they also made 5 trading posts open to Europeans and China. And also they had to give up some land, which is Hong Kong, and the Chinese had to give up some land and money to the British because of their war. And those money was because of war preparation, but that's for another video. Alright. The Opium Wars were already over, but still, a lot of people still hated the Manchu government. I'm saying this, repeating a lot of times, just to remind you, alright? And I have to remind you, repeating stuff is my thing. But still. Alright, this opium trade was done, and it was gone for now, and then there was a new rebellion. It was called the Taiping Rebellion. And this lasted for 13 years, and this weakened the Manchu government. On to our next story. Alright, then after the Taiping Rebellion, there was another war. It was called the Sino-Japanese War. Sino-Japanese War, that's long to remember, so I'll write it down. Sino-Japanese War. The Sino-Japanese War is a war that was fought between China, this China with no modernization, and a modernized Meiji Japan. Qing Dynasty versus modernized Meiji Japan. Who do you think will win? Of course, the Japanese won, and they did. And this was an alert because the Japanese were trying to invade the Qing Empire, and this was an alert for the Qing Empire. They needed to modernize quick to avoid invasions. Right after the Sino-Japanese War, the Manchu government was even more unpopular. And then there was a new rebellion, but still, let's go into another story before we get into this, and you can understand it. Alright, let's get into it. So the story for now we're going to talk about is about a man called Kang Yu-wei. Right, Kang Yu-wei. This is Kang Yu-wei, and I have to say that he's kind of a big idea on Confucius, and he wrote a book called Confucius as a Reformer. If you remember from our Chinese episode, you might know that the Chinese had a brilliant philosopher called Confucius who made Confucianism, but just watch that video if you want to learn more. Let's get back here. And Kang Yu-wei claimed that Confucius wanted to reform all Chinese society since the beginning of his living current dynasty, which is the Qin Dynasty and Han Dynasty. But that's for just watch that video. And then Kang Yu-wei published a book that I just mentioned earlier. A lot of his ideas for the public were very unpopular, even for the government. But the emperor liked Kang Yu-wei's ideas, so he made Kang Yu-wei the main administrator of China. I mean, that's not worth it. That doesn't even worth it. Doesn't even make sense. But later, Kang Yu-wei's ideas were rejected by an emperor who controlled Kang Yu-wei. The emperor was forced to resign his time, and then the empress tried to arrest Kang Yu-wei because she was xenophobic, and then she tried to get foreigners out of China. She was xenophobic, so she didn't like foreign ideas influence Chinese society. Well, Kang Yu-wei was almost arrested, but luckily he was able to escape to Japan. And then, later China was conquered by the Japanese, a bit of it, at least the head part. And then a lot of things happened. And also the Boxer Rebellion started. The Boxer Rebellion was a rebellion that was fighting between also Meiji Japan and China. Well, there are a lot of different sources. Some of them say that the Chinese won, but some say that the Japanese won. Well, I'm not so sure which one to believe, but I'm gonna go with the Japanese winnings and the Chinese winnings. But anyways, if the Japanese won, they could have control of Beijing. That's what this source says. Another source, and another source, the different one, which says China won. says that the Qing Empire just stayed like it, and then they stayed like that for, well, until now, and then we might have new China in the future. But that's for the future, so buckle up. Alright, now we're getting to the end. I've been to China a lot of times before because I lived there, and also I've been to a lot of cities, such as Xi'an, even Beijing, and even the Great Wall of China. I even went to a museum called the Forbidden City. Well, let's talk about that. The Forbidden City is a palace that was the home for all of the Qing Chinese emperors of the Qing Dynasty. And today it's a museum. I've even been there once, and well, it's called the Forbidden City because no one except the emperor can go in unless the emperor gives permission. So I get the name Forbidden. But there are some disadvantages for the Forbidden City. There are a lot of them. We're gonna go for the top ones. One is that the Forbidden City had a lot of slaves for the emperor, and the other outside people didn't have slaves. So this made the emperor even unpopular too. And I'm just gonna write Forbidden City right here. Forbidden City. Alright. Well, anyways, and two, the Forbidden City ended the outside communication with the Forbidden City's inside communication. So the emperor and even the government doesn't even know what's going on in China. So a lot of people just conquered all of China without the government and the emperor knowing. But still, after the Boxer Rebellion, we're gonna go for the Japanese source for this one. The Forbidden City was taken by the Japanese, and people, even foreign soldiers, started living in the Forbidden City. Now we get to a story called Q.E. Story with a man called Q.E. Q.E. was the 12th and last emperor of the Qing Empire and the whole Chinese dynasty. Something went through my throat. Give me that water, please. I much feel better. Refreshing too. Alright, and Q.E. started his emperor career surprisingly 2 years old. If you remember from our Napoleon episode, you might know that Napoleon tried to make his baby emperor when that baby wasn't even 1 year old. Well, Q.E. just became emperor when he was 2 years old. Well, let's just go with Q.E. for now. Anyways, Q.E. became the 12th emperor of the Qing dynasty, and he was the last one to use the Forbidden City as a palace. Later, his own people took him out of emperorcy in 1912. That was long ago. That wasn't so long ago, though. And also, Forbidden City was then later changed to a home to a lot of Japanese people from Japan, and it was never a palace again. Q.E. still lives though, but we're not so sure when he died, but still, the Forbidden City is a good landmark. Well, that's basically it for the beginnings of modern China. If you enjoyed this part of the video, check out the rest of the video to learn more. Oh, and there's an extra thing that will come up in the end of this video. Well, I'll see you then. Shadhan in writing. Alright, now that we got our brief understanding for our modernization of China, let's get started on our question. And speaking of questions, today's questions are, what did you learn about the Qing dynasty, and what are some of your country's old traditions of your country? Well, if you have answers, please put them in the comments below, or just email me in my email. So, let's get started. Take a roll, please. Alright, thank you. Alright. Now let's get started on our first question. What did you learn about the Qing dynasty? Well, I learned that the Qing dynasty is a dynasty that was made by the Manchus. They overthrew the Ming dynasty. And then they made their own dynasty, the Qing dynasty. It was very unpopular to the Chinese because the Manchus were Han Chinese. So it wasn't like they're gonna accept them, but they had to. The Qing Manchus, however, forced the Chinese, which are now the Qing Chinese, shaved their head with a bit of a bald spot and only one braid of hair left. I mean, that's not appropriate. Religions, they're important, but still. And then this was the time when a lot of rebellions and wars happened. One of the wars were the Sino-Japanese War, the Opium Wars, and some rebellions are the Box Rebellion. No, not that Boxers. Boxer Rebellion, and the Taiping Rebellion. We'll cover all these subjects in separate videos. And this was the time when the first emperor was overthrown from his own people. Chinese emperor to be exact. And that guy was the child emperor, Puyi, who started his career when he was only 2 years old. If you remember from our Napoleon episode, you might know that Napoleon tried to make his baby an emperor when the baby wasn't even 1 year old. I mean, that's hardly not offensive. But still, he tried to. And this wasn't accepted by the people. And we're gonna focus on Puyi now. Puyi, and there was also the Forbidden City, which was the homes for the Qing emperors. Puyi was the last one and the 12th emperor to use the Forbidden City as a palace. Today it's kind of like a museum. Kind of. I've been there once before, and I have to say, it kind of looks like a museum. And moving on to the next question. Right. Since I'm a Korean, I'll tell you about Korean traditions. This is still continuing on every year, and these things are celebrated on New Year's Day, which is, well, the first day of every year, but that's for another story. Well, let's get started. So Korean traditions are, every year and New Year's Day, we wear the traditional clothes called hanbok. Do I still have mine? Oh, okay. And if you are another person who doesn't make the difference between the Korean traditional clothes, Chinese traditional clothes, and Japanese traditional clothes, they are all different. They are all different. But skipping on, and that day we also eat some soup called rice cake soup. Rice cake soup, yeah. And it is said that if you eat a rice cake soup, you will get 1 year old. You get 1 year older. So it's kind of like getting 1 year older. But if you don't get it, I'll make another video for that. Alright, next one. We also play games such as the Yut Nor I. I played that game when I was a bit younger, and I kept on winning. I never lost. I never lost. That was miraculous. I got surprised by that. I did 5 times, and I never lost. Well, moving on. And that's it for my answer. Those are the basic stuff. And, well, I'll give you the other answers in another video probably. But still, this is it. And I hope you enjoyed these answers. And I'll see you in my extra history. Shanhan out. Today, on our final extra history for this series on our Hands on Histories, we're going to talk about the Opium War. And I'll remind you, this is not chocolate. And, well, it's from a plant, but we're going to get into that. And today we're going to talk about the Opium Wars, fought by Britain and Qing Dynasty. We'll explain that now. Dun 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 dun. With the manufacturing of opium. Alright, as I said earlier, opium is a drug, and opium is made from a plant called opium poppy. Opium poppy. And later, the British needed tea badly. They are tea fans, and they needed to trade with the Qings. But the Qings will only allow silver to be traded with their currency. However, the British had no silver. They only had gold. So the Qings wouldn't proceed with the trade until Britain gets silver. So Britain does something exactly, I don't have to say terrible, but still very terrible. They started trading. Oh, wait, let me explain it with our word form. I ran out of space, so I'm gonna have to write it right here. All right. They traded opium for silver, and then they used that silver to trade for tea. They are tea fans. See the connection. Okay, you can come up now. All right. And then later they got a lot of tea and a lot of opium. I first thought that opium was a perfume, but then later I found out that it is a drug. And opium is very addictive. So the Chinese always wanted to buy more opium. And this fabulously richened and skyrocketed the British wealth. And their currency is pounds. No, not the weight pounds. Pounds. The currency of Britain and England and Scotland. But still. And after the Qings knew what was happening, they banned opium. So with the opium gone, they couldn't get silver, and without the silver, they couldn't get tea. And opium was worth a lot of money. And if all the opium that was in Qing dynasty was burned, then the British will have a skyrocketing down economy. And the Qing's government already started a blockade. This is a time when whoever an enemy, this in example is the British, gets into that enemy's enemies, in this case China's country, then that person, Britain. Well, let me explain. The Qing dynasty made a blockade on the English. If any English gets in, they will be killed. If any British gets escaped and goes out, they get killed. And during that was happening, Charles Darwin went to Galapagos Islands and studied a lot of wildlife. And later all of these things were done with a war battle, which is the Opium Wars. And it was fought between the Chinese Navy. They were not experienced, so I'm gonna go with level 29 against the British Royal Navy, which I'll go for a very experienced race, so level 54. They fought each other. The British had more damage than the Chinese Qing, so the British won eventually. The Qing never wanted to surrender, but then the British got more ships, more royal navies with more music, white music, and then the Qing dynasty currently surrendered. Later they would give up. Later the British told them to do this. They made Hong Kong a British colony. Then they made 5 trading posts open to Europeans in China, and they also made the Chinese give up a lot of money because of war preparations. They just said that they were going to defend themselves, but still, the British believed that this was war preparations. And Hong Kong was called the Pearl of the East later, in the end. And then a lot of things happened to Hong Kong, but that's for another video. And if I do get enough information, I'll make a separate video for that. And speaking of videos, this is the end of our video, 10th video for our season 4. And this is the right at the end for our series on our Hands-on History series for this one. And I hope I can make a new Hands-on History series, but I'm not so sure about that still, if I do get enough money, but still. I'll see you next time. Shenhan out! Okay, this is the end of our Hands-on History series video, and well, let's get for who made this video, and then we're gonna get into our celebration. This video was made by me. It was produced by me. The sponsor for this video was me. And this writing of these things and this trading posts was written by me. This map was drawn by me. This is complex, and I hope I wouldn't draw like that again. And the sources for this series of the Hands on History series were these Hands on History books. There are actually 4 of them, not 3. And now that we talked about the Hands on History books, let's get onto the celebration. Alright, this Hands on History book, The Ancient Civilization, is where we learn about Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent and about Egypt and a lot of other civilizations. Also, that's just when we learned about a bit of China. And the Hands on History 2, the Middle Ages, we learned a lot about. And we learned it with Joan of Arc and a lot about the Handmaiden, but those are mythical. And 3, the History, Age of Discovery, is my most favorite one because it talked a lot about Korean history with Eason Shin. And if you still remember from our Korean Peninsula story and the Joseon Dynasty story, you might know a bit about Korea. I did learn a lot. And for today's education book is The Hands on History, Age of Imperialism, where we learned a lot about the Industrial Revolution, the American Civil War, and a lot of other crazy and fun stuff. Oh, and I'm gonna show you the notes for all of these Hands on History books later in the video. Let's get to it. And with the help of my Hands on History channel, and my own personal channel, Hanshin, I can make videos whenever I want. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and hit the bell button to all notifications so you wouldn't miss any of my videos. And if I do ask a question, please answer them in the comments below or just email me at my email. 20jur@naver.com. And speaking of questions, today's question is, what is this picture right here? Is it A, chocolate, B, opium, or C, chocolate and opium mixed together? Well, I hope I'll see you in my future videos, not Hands on Histories probably. And well, speaking of our celebration, roll the notes! Bye-bye!